Hi, screen printers. Colin from Ryonet. I was trying to take some pictures so I could show some of the detail that we showed that we could keep while we were doing our exposure. Again, 157 standard and 157 thin thread, so people can see kind of a touch base, not a deep dive on threads and detail. That could be a big topic. I just wanted to do a light touch. And show what emulsions are capable of within the confines of the mesh scaffold that they're going to be on. So I'm going to zoom in here real quick, just so you guys can see. That's thin thread, 157 thin thread, and just some edge detail. I'm going to throw a dime in here so you can see. That's the edge of a dime. So you can see, and again, go home, grab one of your loops. Now this is just a little 10x loop, very inexpensive, easy to get, and take a look at your mesh. Understand the scaffold that you're dealing with. It's not just what the ink goes through, it's also what the emulsion holds on to. Segue. Can I zoom in? So within, over under on this mesh, so there's this little valley in here on each knuckle. The over under is called a knuckle. So there's like this little valley in there, and on the previous video on haze remover, that's we talked about pigment getting stuck in there. Well, that's how tiny it ends up getting. What that little tiny space is. Right in there. That's where the pigment gets stuck. So anyways, that's what we want. So anyways, super fine detail. Lots of fun stuff to geek out on if we want to be a geek about it. And again, reinforcing that everyone can do this. These are not tools that are out of the reach for the average screen printer. This is an SBQ emulsion. This is an LED tube light source. Scoop could, yeah, there's nothing different, thin thread, okay, you go and buy some eco frames and you put on some panels, but that'll, with that investment, you'll be able to do quite a bit with that. So I want to move this over to look at LPI and how some of that impacts what we're able to keep on screen. So what we're looking at here are shadow dots. This is, the 100% down to 75% or so. I'm not sure exactly what this one is, where we're at that we're actually keeping a dot. And in reality, for this conversation, it doesn't matter. What we can see is that that's a really tiny dot that's working really hard to hang on. So that dot is able to hang on at a crosshair. This one is squarely in the middle of that thread. Same here, same here. And what we're not seeing are the threads that, or the dots that could only hold on with a small portion of the thread. And let's see if I can find another section that will allow us, see if I can't use my unsteady hands to focus this at all. Now it's a different portion that's a little bit better. Again, I have this at an angle so we can try and get some dimension on it. But what we're seeing here overall, and hopefully this is catching well on the camera, is that in order to keep these shadow dots, they need something to cling on to, which is why we always talk about higher LPI for doing halftones on. This is why, so that the dots actually have some place to hold on to. So let's get into, there we go. These are bigger dots. We're transitioning towards the end of the shadow areas. You can still see that this is, going to let through quite a bit of ink. And we get into bigger and bigger dots. You notice that they don't really look like dots, do they? They look like little blobs. That's because nothing other than a laser printer is actually going to be able to give us anything that looks correct. Let's see. And there's about the same area. That's the halftone dot that we get with an inkjet printer. Again, we're not going to be able to get any better until we really get up with super, super high resolution, or we go to a laser. And again, a laser meaning a laser exposure unit, which is out of the reach for the great many of us. So when we start to look at that, and then we go back to look at the shape of these dots, the emulsion is actually doing a pretty good job of holding its shape. Let's go into finer and finer dots. As we start to get into that's around a midpoint. When it starts to look like squares, that's a 50% point. So let's get into finer and finer dots. So you can see how some of these holes have a lot of space to them, and then others like this one doesn't have the greatest amount of space. Now that one has 4 very well-defined holes that can in the mesh that can drop ink, and this one is kind of some. Let's get into some finer dots. Again, this is geeking out. This is having fun. Come along and join the trip. And now we can see where, again, how much that thread really can get in the way of what's going on. Remember, this is the thin thread. So I'm going to put this down now. Zoom out. No more panic. I'm going to grab the standard 157. Pop this on here. Let's get into those fine dots. Well, first let's go back here. Let's look at the shadow areas. And one of the things that we're going to notice is that the threads are a lot thicker. So let's zoom back in. Those threads are quite a bit thicker, and which means that there's lots for the dots to hang on to, and you can keep a bigger tonal area as a result. Again, this is 35 lines per inch on a 157 or 156 standard mesh, 10% EOM. So while the ink is, a little bit more difficult to push through compared to thin thread, this is when we start talking about halftones, higher mesh counts. This is why we want to do that. There's more surface area to hold on to, but at the same time, it's not always desirable. So there's a little bit of a trade-off. And again, this is a light touch on the subject. This is just to introduce to you this visual understanding of what's going on. So let's scooch back down, take a look at some of these dot shapes, and then how it relates to am I moving focus again? I don't think this was really meant to be played with as much as I'm playing with it. So another thing that I wanted to point out is you can see the mesh marks a lot more than you could before. So that's one of the things that happens when we're talking about EOM. You're never going to get a perfectly smooth RZ. We can kind of see the strata and the structure of the emulsion around as it goes up and down, the shadowing that's actually there. The higher your EOM, the less that goes away, but this still gives you respectable edge definition. It's an interesting science. Again, trying to create and keep a light touch here. So I'm going to move down further and further. And you can see how those threads start to get in the way more of printing a dot. And in here, you can see that this dot here is just 2 openings. This one's 2 and a little more. you know, it starts to, the threads get in the way a lot more. I mean, that one's really good right there. We've got 4 openings, and then that one's almost just a 1. And as we get smaller and smaller, just how things start to really get in the way. And this is why at some point you end up getting this visual moire pattern. It's more of a thread interference. It's not because, you know, the emulsion can't rinse away where the dot is. It's because the threads get in the way of actually letting anything go through. So let's see here. What else we got? What else we got? So edge, sometimes when we look at the edge of our stencil, it doesn't always look as sharp as it could. Well, I want to show you that sometimes when we're, you know, we're going through this right here, if that emulsion was crooked at all and ended up splitting the lines, it can end up looking weird for us. It can end up looking like it has chatter. Of course, the white mesh will enhance that, but it's just another thing to be aware of, another thing to pay attention to. Like this looks, let me get back to that. This here looks a little bit soft because it's right over the edge and under the edge of the knuckles, and that can create kind of a zigzag pattern. Anyways, these are the little things that you get to see when you're actually diving in and geeking out on what's going on in your film. So let's see. So this is more of that fine detail again that we first looked at. We can see, again, the thread diameter just gets in the way of ink and where those open areas are and how it can flow through. The resolution is still there. We're still keeping crazy tiny detail. You know, let me grab that dime again. And that's the edge of the dime. And that's 3 knuckles, the space of 3 knuckles in there. So we're still able to do a lot, and we're still able to keep a lot of detail. This portion of the video was, again, not meant to dive into, again, I don't want to talk about it. Go really deep dive into the details and the nuances, thread diameter, emulsion detail, angle of halftones so that you're missing as many of these knuckles of the mesh as possible. That'll be another video. I just wanted people to kind of enjoy the visuals, take a look at what's actually happening to your emulsion, why you see detail come out, why you don't see detail come out. You know, a lot of the times it's simply because the threads get in the way. There's a line right there, but we've got mesh going this way. And that line gets lost right there when the mesh goes over it at that weird angle. It just covers up the line. So, so where I'm going with this is understand the limitations of your tools. If you have a need to go bigger, in essence, find the tools that allow you to go bigger. Yeah, this is a big topic, and I'm trying to touch on it a little bit more lightly and not go super hard. But you know, in this situation, the images tell 1,000 words. You know, the emulsion is resolving. The emulsion is letting the image be there. The mesh is getting in the way. Alrighty. So this is going to end this portion of the video. Hit me up with questions, comments. If you guys are still here in the chats, ask questions. Keep this conversation rolling. Education is wonderful and needed, and we're here to give it to you. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Reach out to us. We will talk soon. See you in the next video.